Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're bringing high energy to a topic that literally affects every single one of us: human intelligence. For the longest time, society has essentially defined being smart by a single narrow test score. But what if that score is really only telling a tiny fraction of the whole story? What if true intelligence is actually a much broader, much more dynamic landscape? Well, today we are completely demystifying intelligence and exploring a groundbreaking framework that totally changed how we think about the human mind. Let's get into it.
Now, you might think a quote like this comes from a struggling student, right? But actually, this is from Robert Sternberg, literally one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. Even as a kid back in the 1950s, he felt this intense, paralyzing dread whenever the school psychologist brought out an IQ test. He just knew he didn't perform well on them. But instead of letting that perceived failure define him, that very dread fueled a lifelong curiosity. He realized that the testing system was missing something absolutely vital about human capability.
And the core problem Sternberg identified is summarized perfectly right here. Early intelligence metrics were just obsessed with static numbers. Sure, they measured abstract academic problem-solving really well, but they often failed spectacularly at predicting whether someone could actually adapt to the real world, navigate a messy workplace, or invent something completely new. Basically, intelligence was being treated as this dusty, fixed quality of mind rather than a dynamic, everyday tool.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with beyond traditional IQ tests, then cover Sternberg's Triarchic theory. After that, we'll break down analytical intelligence, the internal, creative intelligence, the experiential, and practical intelligence, the contextual. Finally, we'll map up with success, wisdom, and critiques.
Section 1. Beyond traditional IQ tests.
The evolution of intelligence testing is such a fascinating journey. Back in 1904, Charles Spearman proposed that a single general intelligence factor, which he called G, underlined all our cognitive abilities. The idea was basically, if you're good at one thing, you'll generally be good at everything else. By 1938, Louis Thurstone argued, well, no, intelligence isn't just one factor, it's several primary abilities. Fast forward to 1983, and Howard Gardner blew the doors wide open with his theory of multiple intelligences, suggesting we have entirely separate domains like musical or kinesthetic intelligence. And right on the heels of that, in 1984, Sternberg published his revolutionary Triarchic theory, directly challenging traditional research by focusing on how intelligence actually operates out there in the real world.
Section 2. Sternberg's Triarchic theory.
So Sternberg didn't just tack on a few new categories. He entirely restructured how we process information into three distinct interacting areas. These are the compositional, which we usually call analytical, the experiential or creative, and the contextual, which is practical. And the key takeaway here, they absolutely do not work in isolation. They are deeply interconnected forces.
Which brings us to Sternberg's brilliant redefinition of the whole concept. He defines intelligence not as some static capacity, but as active mental self-management. It is the purposive adaptation to, selection of, and shaping of your real-world environments. It's really all about setting goals, even vague ones, and managing your own internal resources to achieve them in the messy, completely unpredictable outside world.
Section 3. Analytical intelligence, the internal.
Okay, let's look at the first pillar, the competential or analytical facet of intelligence. This is all about an individual's internal world. This is exactly the kind of intelligence that traditional psychometric tests and your standard academic puzzles actually do a pretty decent job of measuring. It's that ability to take a problem apart, identify all its little pieces, and apply systematic, logical reasoning to find a solution. Think of it as your classic book smarts.
But Sternberg didn't just stop at a broad definition. He broke this analytical intelligence down into three distinct internal mental mechanisms. First, you have the meta-components. These are the higher-order executive processes you use to plan, monitor, and evaluate your overall strategy. Second are the performance components. That's the actual cognitive heavy lifting, the actions that carry out those instructions to solve the problem. And third, the knowledge acquisition components, which is simply how effectively you encode, combine, and store new information as you're learning it.
To put that into perspective, here are some really concrete examples of analytical intelligence in action. When you look at a visual puzzle on an IQ test, like a Raven's progressive matrix, you encode the visual elements, you figure out the underlying rule, and boom, you find the missing piece. But it's also the exact same intelligence you use when you're reading a stack trace to hunt down and diagnose a bug in computer code,
or when you are systematically comparing the methodologies of two really dense academic papers.
Section 4. Creative Intelligence, the Experiential.
Next up is the experiential, or creative, facet of intelligence. This is all about how an individual connects their internal world to external reality. And to be clear, we aren't just talking about being a good painter or musician here. It is your capacity to be intellectually flexible, to generate sudden insights, and to synthesize entirely new solutions when you are faced with a task that is completely new and not well defined. Sternberg points out something super interesting here. Creative intelligence is actually best revealed at two totally opposite extremes. The first is novelty. That's how you react the very first time you encounter a completely new situation that forces you to think outside the box. The second extreme is automatization. This is the ability to take a task you've just learned and quickly make it an automatic routine process. By automating the familiar, like driving your usual route to work completely on autopilot, your brain effectively frees up cognitive resources so you can focus your attention on tackling the next big, complex challenge.
So the absolutely crucial point here is the difference between analyzers and synthesizers. Sternberg observed these graduate students who had exceptionally high analytical IQ scores. They totally aced their standardized tests, but they completely froze up when they were asked to design their own original research. They were brilliant analyzers, for sure, but they lacked the insightful synthesis required to generate new ideas from scratch. A high test score absolutely does not guarantee creative intelligence.
Section 5. Practical Intelligence, the Contextual.
And now for our final pillar, contextual or practical intelligence. This is your ability to turn theoretical knowledge into real-world action. You can think of it as street smarts or just plain old common sense. A massive part of this relies on something called tacit knowledge. These are the things you learn through direct, hands-on experience rather than explicit, formal instruction from a textbook. It's knowing the unspoken rules of the game.
Practical intelligence involves three distinct, adaptive actions to help you survive and thrive. First is adaptation, which is when you adjust your own behavior to fit the environment, like simply putting on a heavy coat when it's freezing outside. Second is shaping. This is when you actually change the environment to fit your needs, like taking charge and reorganizing a dysfunctional team at work. And third is selection, which is recognizing when an environment is just a fundamentally bad fit and choosing to move to a completely new one that better suits your strengths.
Let's look at some real stories that brilliantly illustrate this. Sternberg researched children in rural Kenya who possessed incredible, highly complex, tacit knowledge of indigenous herbal medicines, even though they scored poorly on conventional Western academic tests. Their intelligence was perfectly, beautifully suited to their specific real-world context. Another great example is a student Sternberg called Celia. Now, Celia wasn't the top analytical scorer, but her practical intelligence was off the charts. She knew exactly how to impress at job interviews, she knew exactly which research to pursue to get published, and she expertly navigated the unspoken political rules of academia to achieve massive career success.
Section 6. Success, Wisdom, and Critiques. Over time, Sternberg evolved his triarchic theory into what he called successful intelligence. This is the empowering idea that you combine analytical, creative, and practical skills, capitalizing on your strengths and compensating for your weaknesses to achieve your own personal goals in life. Now, to be totally fair, we do have to look impartially at the scientific critiques. Psychologists like Linda Gottfredson point out that when you actually measure these practical intelligence skills, they still statistically overlap heavily with traditional general intelligence, or the G factor. Factor analysis show that analytical, creative, and practical skills actually share a massive amount of underlying cognitive variance. So the debate definitely continues in the psychology world over just how independent these three pillars truly are. But Sternberg's framework didn't stop growing there. He later expanded it into the WIX model, which stands for wisdom, intelligence, creativity, synthesized. He observed that, someone can be analytically brilliant and incredibly creative, but without wisdom to guide those traits, the outcomes can be pretty disastrous. True intelligent leadership requires integrating all of these components ethically for the greater good. Wow, we have covered a lot of ground today. We've moved far beyond the childhood dread of the standardized test to see that human cognition is this incredibly vibrant tapestry. We all have a unique mix of analytical logic, creative synthesis, and practical street smarts. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. If intelligence is truly mental self-management and not just a fixed number printed on a piece of paper, which aspect of your intelligence are you going to actively develop and shape today? Think about that and keep learning.